Aloha from Hawaii. We are at our International Conference on Education in Arts and Humanities. Next to me are standing Dr. Peter Mataira and Dr. LJ Raifan. Thank you so much for being here. Could you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us what you do?
My name is LJ Raifan. I'm from Chuuk, Federated State of Micronesia. I work with Caroline College and Pastoral Institute. At the same time, I also teach with the University of Hawaii at Manoa and Chaminade University.
Aloha, my name is Peter Mataira, Professor of Social Work at Hawaii Pacific University. I teach obviously in the School of Social Work. I do research. A lot of my work is around Indigenous communities, and I teach research, I teach ethics, and I also teach community practice as well as clinical social work, and I do a lot of work in Native communities around the Pacific and in different parts of Asia.
And you both were part of a panel today that was looking at AI issues from an interdisciplinary perspective. Can you tell us what your talk was about?
I focus mostly in Micronesia, particularly in Chuuk, looking at the role of AI, especially in storytelling, an important aspect of the Chuukese culture. We use stories almost for everything. We're oral tradition. Instead of writing things down, we depend solely on storytelling as part of not only who we are, but also as a medium to share history, to pass down cultural skills and important aspects of our culture.
So in my presentation, I talked about the impact of AI on Native communities and basically posed a number of questions around AI's as a guest or a welcome or unwelcome guest in our communities. I talked about the biases that it's potentially, can be either positive or have a negative impact on our communities. I also talked about questioned really the use of AI in terms of data sovereignty and the idea of if we aren't aware and aren't ethically responsible in the use of AI, then it possibly could be another form of extraction and recolonization. So I really am interested in this idea of data as the new land.
How has AI affected Indigenous people's well-being in the Pacific Island region?
I think it would be fair to kind of, instead of talking about the whole Pacific, it's kind of complicated and it's a very fast amount of place, diverse people to talk about. I think I feel more comfortable talking about Micronesia, specifically in Chuuk. I think we've already feel the impact, even if it's like something that is newly introduced into the islands, more of a trend, but it's started to take over many of the things that we have. I was just talking to Peter earlier that just in the past few months, we've already see an increased number of songs that are produced using AI, taking over the roles of Chuukese artists. We've already seen the number of papers that are turning to teachers that are actually written by AI instead of students. We have to change the way that we operate. We have to change the way that we train teachers so that they also come up with ways that detect the use of AI, but also to share with their students how they can use AI in a way that it's benefiting them. Not taking away their creativity, but how do it actually boost their creativity, sort of make that idea clear when they have to share. Using it as a voice to tell their experiences, their encounters, or things that they want to articulate, rather than letting technology really doing it for them.
So I really, really appreciated what LJ talked about in his presentation about storytelling and about voice, and your question about the impact of AI on Pacific communities. But in all communities generally, I think there are a number of points that we really need to have open discussions about, and that is its ethical use, its moral use, to encourage our communities, our young people to invest in training and teaching of our teachers, but also of our young people in the use of AI. I think it's inherently good or bad. It depends on how you use it. But I believe that one of the ways that we can strengthen or incorporate the use of AI much more ethically would be for us to figure out how we take control and how we shift power in terms of those kinds of dynamics.
So what do you need in order to respond to things proactively instead of reactively to how AI is unfolding?
I think it's important to take a balanced approach, looking at both impacts or deficits and benefits to our people, our place, our culture. I kind of see it more of like the same thing with a cassette or a DVD player. You can have that piece of technology, but it really depends on what movie that you selected and put in that will be projecting on the screen. In that sense, it is the same thing with AI. It's a technology. How we use it, how we want it to serve our purpose, it's really up to us. I shared earlier that if we kind of take more of a defensive approach, we don't want to use it, others will continue to tell the story for us using AI. And we'll be on the sideline whether we agree or disagree. We're not being part of the movement to define it and making it really truthful to our use. So I think the important thing for us to be thinking about how it can be used ethically, looking at both the disadvantages and advantages of AI.
Native communities, Pacific communities, Indigenous communities are inherently resilient and resistant. And I think one of the important lessons we should learn is when we start to fear it, then we become suspicious and we don't trust. Inherently, most Indigenous communities are not trusting of science. They're not trusting of academia. So I think having Indigenous scholars and researchers and academics within institutions that can in some ways act as translators or transformers or facilitators. But I think inherently that we build on the resilience capacities and the resistance capacities that our communities have and not be afraid. I think that and one way we do that is by learning about those systems. We've been around a long time and we're not going anywhere. So I think we've got to figure out how we embrace, how we utilize, how we take some ownership, and how we then transmit that on to the next generations.
So basically you're talking about empowering Indigenous people and communities, but how do you do that at a time when institutions are actively taking the power away from these people?
Well, obviously we have to decolonize the institutions, right? But that's a really, really important question, about how do we do that, and I typically don't use the term empowerment because it implies that you don't have power. So we've got to give that to you. So I talk about the re-empowering of our communities. And one way we do that is, again, what LJ talked about. We do that through our storytelling, through our voice. But we've got to do it in a way where we control the tools that incorporate that voice, the AI tools, the systems. So we empower through our stories. We can't empower through, through a colonial policy. It just doesn't work. So it starts with us, as LJ said. So I think that's what I talk about. It's like, how do we re-empower our communities by actually re-enabling them or providing access? So having scholars, having academics, having researchers who are part of that sort of opening up those pathways is important.
I think it's interesting how we kind of look at, and I'm very glad that he kind of coiled the term re-empowerment instead of empowerment. But when we look at the purpose of institution, like I think I talk about redesigning curriculum, rewriting syllabus, we have to take a participatory approach. And I think the institutions that we create, it's to serve our purpose. It's not to serve somebody's purpose. And I talk about that things has to be from within rather than looking out to outside institutions. We have to take a proactive and a more active approach in embracing, encouraging our local institutions to be part of the movement, to continually use that voice to talk about our issues, the challenges, and things that really matter to us.
Which brings me very nicely to the last question. As academics who represent these indigenous communities, do you feel you're being heard by local government and policymakers?
It's funny how you come up with the term academics. On our way out, like he was asking me, do you consider yourself academic? And I quickly answered saying, no, I do not consider myself academic. And I think my intention to get a PhD is not really like looking at being like, or can I with that identity of like academia. I kind of see myself as like getting education more as a vehicle to be able to participate in the global setting where our stories need to be recognized and needs to be heard. But like we're talking about insider, outsider, accessibility, all of these things. And I think when you stay grounded to the place and the people that you represent, I think you can be heard. And it's also through your intentions and through your purpose that people appreciate things that you've done for them. And if you're doing things in a more protocol and respectful way, that they know that it's represent the true image and the true voices of that people or that community or that place, then you'll be respected. You'll be honored and you'll be supported from your own people. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, we just had that conversation as we were walking over here. I asked LJ, do you think you consider yourself an academic? And we both he kind of said no, and he laughed, and I went, I don't either, and I laughed. And not that we're disrespecting the idea of what an academic, the role is. We're just saying, when you're in between your communities and institutions, it's really hard to be one or the other. You know, that in-betweenness is such a difficult, it's so exhausting at times. And you talk to a lot of Indigenous scholars, researchers, academics, they'll tell you that, you know, inherently one of the reasons why we don't publish a lot is because we've got so many obligations in our communities. It's important that, you know, and it has been said that what does an academic mean? We provide one of those voices. And then what we can do, I think in a very political way, is to, you know, when our communities feel threatened, when they feel like, you know, they're getting a difficult time from governments, we can act like the deflector of those, you know, so the policymakers will look to these scholars and academics and not focus in on sort of beating up our communities. So in some ways we provide that role, and as I said, it's tiring, it's exhausting, but we wouldn't have it any other way. So I think that's one of the important kind of roles that we play is that sort of like the voice that needs to be there when they need us. And those letters, you know, that we carry do have some power when it comes to working with our institutions. So, yeah, that's kind of like how I see it.
Thank you so much for your service to your communities, and thank you so much for being here at the conference. I think it's a very timely topic. It always has been, but especially now with AI. So thank you so much for being a voice for your communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Tavo.